what's up, hello? My name is Emma, and today I'm going to be sharing with you guys the books that I read in April. Not to brag, but I had a really good reading month. I ended up reading 9 books combined, 4 physical books and 5 audiobooks. I also just realized that 3 of those books are all rereads. I'm clearly making really good choices. So the first book I read in the month of April is Rumble Buttercup by Matthew Gray Gubler. If you did not know, Matthew Gray Gubler plays Spencer Reed on Criminal Minds, which is like one of my all-time favorite TV shows, and I have loved Matthew Gray Gubler for years, so I was very excited to hear that he was publishing his own picture book that he wrote and illustrated. It is a story of a monster who believes that people will run away from him if they see him, so he lives in solitude underneath the sewers, but he really wants to make friends and go out and experience the world. But it was just a really cute story. It's all about accepting yourself, and I also just love Matthew Gray Gubler's very unique art style, so it was a fun read. I think I probably gave it like 3 stars because I just don't have a lot of profound things to say about it, but I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely read more picture books from Matthew Gray Gubler in the future. The first audiobook I listened to in April is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I listened to this on Audible, and it was actually my second time listening to the audiobook. The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo was one of my top favorite books of last year. It is just magnificent and spectacular, and I truly believe it's one of my favorite books of all time. Our main character is a Hollywood starlet named Evelyn Hugo, who was one of the most successful movie stars of the 50s, 60s, all the way up to the 80s, but when she disappeared from show business, she took her story with her. So in the present day, Evelyn hires a low-ranking journalist under the pretense that she's going to deliver an article about some recent charity work, but she ends up telling Monique, who is the journalist, that Evelyn wants her to write her life story and publish it after she dies. So Evelyn begins retelling everything from when she was a young girl, moving from Harlem to Hollywood, making a name for herself, and also why she married these 7 men and what happened along those marriages. This book is just absolutely remarkable. I have never encountered a book that was able to appeal to a huge variety of different reading tastes. Taylor Jenkins Reid is just such a talented author when it comes to every aspect from prose to characterization and storytelling structure. It is just such a thrilling story that I'm incapable of putting down. It is scandalous and glamorous and deals with so many incredible topics like race, domestic abuse, sexuality, and so much more. I know this book is very hyped, and a lot of people have the view that like if it's hyped it's going to disappoint me, and I don't want to read it, but this novel deserves every ounce of praise it's received. And like, honestly, I've just hit the point where I'm like, where the fuck is my TV adaptation? Evelyn Hugo would be a gold mine as either a TV show or a movie, and just someone's got to buy the rights already. The next audiobook I listened to in April was actually Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. I listened to it through my local library on Libby, and it's honestly a book I thought I would probably never get to. Memoirs are just not my thing, and the only time I ever really read them is if it's like a person or a topic that I'm really invested in. But I was just watching some TED Talks one night, and I decided to watch a few of Elizabeth Gilbert's because I had watched them as an undergraduate student, and I was like, you know what? I should read her book. Eat, Pray, Love, as I'm sure you've heard, is the best-selling phenomenon. It is a memoir about a woman who is on a path to self-discovery and decides to spend a year in Italy, India, and Indonesia. I gave Eat, Pray, Love 3.5 out of 5 stars. I just feel like I just don't have a lot to say on this book. I firmly enjoyed my time listening to it. Like, I really found a lot of the anecdotes very valuable. It was easy to listen to, and it kept my mind interested. But other than that, it just like wasn't anything spectacular to me, but it also wasn't like bad or boring. I also really liked Elizabeth Gilbert's writing voice. Like the moment I started, I was like, damn, this woman is really talented, and like writing is most definitely her calling. Keep in mind, again, this is definitely out of my comfort zone, not something I have a lot of experience reading, but while Eat, Pray, Love has like changed the lives of millions of people, and that's great, I just didn't have a similar experience with it. Like, I went into it with an open mind, and I genuinely enjoyed my time with the book, but my connection didn't really go any deeper than like, these were some cool stories. So yeah, it was good. It was like a solid book, and I would definitely read more from Elizabeth Gilbert in the future. The next book I read in the month of April is Let Me Hear a Rhyme by Tiffany D. Jackson. This book comes out this May, and it has been one of my most anticipated books of the year. And I'm so happy to say this book totally lived up to all of my expectations, and I just had an absolute blast reading it and ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Let Me Hear a Rhyme takes place in Brooklyn in the late 1990s, and it follows 2 friends who have recently recently just lost one of their other friends in a shooting. The boy who died's name was Steph, and he was low-key like an amazing rapper, but he never shared his music with the world. So his best friends, Kadir and Jarrell, team up with Steph's younger sister named Jasmine, and they decide to secretly release his music under an alias so that the world can hear what he has to say. Listen, I love like everything about Let Me Hear a Rhyme, but particularly I just loved the setting and a lot of the thematic elements. You know, 1990s Brooklyn was just like the hub of hip hop. This book takes place right around the time when Biggie Smalls had just recently been murdered, so there's a lot of strong tensions going on in this book. And just everything surrounding the group's plans for Steph's music was just so fun and exhilarating while also being very intense. Like, I just could not get through this book quick enough, and I really enjoyed the characters as well. Each of them have their own perspectives, and they bring some really important themes to the story. Obviously, grief is a prominent element in the story, but for example, Jasmine brings a lot of Black history to the story, which was super fun and interesting to learn about. Kadir talks a lot about gang violence and toxic masculinity. It was just such a fantastic story, and like even more than I really was expecting. I only really had a gripe with just like a few small structural elements of the story, which I feel is pretty consistent with how I felt about another Tiffany D. Jackson book, which was Monday's Not Coming. I didn't really care for the way the romance started in this book. Like, I think that the characters had a lot of chemistry and it totally made sense for them to be together, but just the way that it was set up felt a little not natural at some points. And also, I would have really liked for the ending to be longer. Like, I feel like there could have been another 5 chapters to really space out from when the climax happens, so we can see how that influences all of the different main characters. But other than that, it was a fabulous story. I'm so happy I read it. It might be on my favorites of the year. I'm not really sure. I'm like putting it on the honorable mentions for now, and we'll see how it plays out with the rest of the books I read this year. But it was so great, and if you're interested in some fun contemporary stories, this is totally one you need to put on your list. The next book I listened to on audio was The Devouring Grey by Christine Lynn Herman, and I believe I listened to this on Scribd. The Devouring Grey is a recent fantasy debut set in the elusive town of Four Paths, New York, where the founding families all inherit different supernatural powers that are used to protect the town from this mysterious monster called the Grey. I ended up giving The Devouring Grey 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was another story that like I enjoyed and was really good, but it just didn't blow me away. The Devouring Grey does have some really big strengths in my opinion. Particularly, I just loved the atmosphere of this book. The setting of Four Paths was just super creepy and spooky. It made me feel like I was reading like an older, classic YA paranormal fantasy story. It's very frequently compared to things like Riverdale, Stranger Things, and The Vampire Diaries, and I just have to say those are so incredibly accurate, and I feel like they take from all of the greatest points of the ambience of those shows. It is super indicative of where YA is today, how it has grown and progressed through the years, but also reminiscent of where it came from. Damn, that was like deep. And I surprisingly loved the politics in this book. Like, I did not expect this book to have like any political themes whatsoever, but really delving into the tensions and the relationships between the different founding families and how the hierarchy of this town is structured was just so fascinating to me. It was just so deep and nuanced and complex. And like every time we got a little bit deeper into like why these different families are fighting and what actions are they taking up against one another, and just like the history behind what has built where Four Paths is today was just so fun and interesting. And I like did not expect this to be something that was highlighted in this book at all, so it was a really nice surprise. Unfortunately, while I loved those things so much, and like I feel like you can tell it's like some of the things I'm the most passionate about that I've talked about in this wrap up, unfortunately the rest of the book, that's telling me I should go to class soon. I just didn't feel as strongly about the rest of the book, particularly in relation to the characters. The individual characters themselves and like their personalities and attributes did not wow me at all. I really disliked Justin. He was just so irritating to me, and I did not like him at all throughout the story, but I just didn't care about any of the characters whatsoever. I feel like you could have swapped the story out for an entirely new like cast and I would have enjoyed it more. It's like actually really annoying to think about because like I liked this book so much in the beginning, but by the end I did not care about it as significantly just because the characters did not stand out to me and I felt no connection to them whatsoever. Potter. So definitely a book with highs and lows, but I am not at all upset that I read it. Like, I really did enjoy a lot of the story, and I will totally plan on reading book 2 when it comes out in the future. The next 2 audiobooks I listened to in April are part of a reread that I have been continuing over the last few months, and that is Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix and Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince by J.K. Rowling. I'm just gonna hold Half-Blood Prince because it's my favorite and this is heavy. I have reviews of every single Harry Potter book, full spoiler-filled discussions, which you should totally go check out if you want to discuss your Harry Potter feels with me. But like, I've talked about these books so much in wrap-ups, at this point I just don't know what to say. With this reread, I can confirm that Half-Blood Prince is most definitely my favorite Harry Potter book. I discovered this during my last reread, I believe, and it was totally consistent with this reading experience. Like, as soon as I started, I get so invested and I just cannot stop listening. My experience reading these books is pretty much the same as last time. Like, there are absolutely moments where I'm like super overwhelmed with the magic of Harry Potter, and I'm just like so blessed that these books exist and they have been a part of my life as long as they have. I feel like every time I reread Harry Potter, I gain a greater appreciation for it in terms of its literary merit. Like, for so many years, I've just been gushing over this book because I think it is so amazing and exciting and fun and special to me, but I'm really able to appreciate the genius behind the storytelling at a lot of points in the story. But with this reread, I'm also starting to pick up on more little inconsistencies and plot holes, if you will. Like, an easy example of this is in Sorcerer's Stone. Petunia says that Lily would always come home and show her parents her tricks over the summer, but like, that doesn't make sense because in year 2, Harry got in trouble for just having magic occur around him. But you know what? I'm not afraid to say sometimes that Harry Potter, it gets a pass because of what it means to me, and that's okay. So I'm loving my reread. Hopefully I will get to Deathly Hallows in May. And oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm already done with this reread. How is it so short? I just love Harry Potter, if you couldn't tell. The next physical book I read in April was Serpentine Dub by Shelby Morin, and this book comes out in September. Serpentine Dub is a 17th century France-inspired fantasy novel about a witch who is forced into marriage with a witch hunter. Now, while I always consider fantasy to be my absolute favorite genre, starting a new fantasy sometimes can be extremely daunting to me, especially if it is a high fantasy or just feels like a high fantasy novel. And I was having some of those feelings about Serpentine Dub, but once I started this story, I fell head over heels in love with it, and I like do not know where all my passion for this came from, but I am so obsessed with this story, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Number 1, I just love the setting, the atmosphere, and the magic system of this story. Like, it's just super romantic because it's 17th century France, and it has this forbidden love story. And I thought that the way that magic, more specifically witchcraft, is handled in this book was really great. Like, I don't want to go into too many of the details because I think it's a very rich and complex world that you want to unfold for yourself. But I just really enjoyed the magic system, and I would have enjoyed even learning more about the different types of powers that exist, which I hope we'll get to in the sequel. I am so obsessed with Lou LeBlanc. Oh my goodness, she is absolutely one of my new favorite fictional heroines ever. She's incredible. She is a witch, she's a criminal, she's a badass, but she's also a softie, and I just want to protect her with my life. I also enjoyed our male lead named Reed. Like, it's really hard for anyone to compare to Lou in this story. Like, my standards have risen. He's just pretty different from a lot of boys of fantasy. I feel like he has that sort of like bad boy vibe, but he's also like pretty polite and compassionate and caring, which was very surprising, but I really liked the combination. I just feel like all the characters in this book had a lot of layers, and they were uncovered very nicely throughout the story. The thing I loved about this story is just like the overall growth and development. Like, the beginning of the story is so far off of where things end. It almost feels like I read like 2 books because so much happens, but also the pacing was really well done. So it was overall really enjoyable. And this is another book where I really enjoyed the political intrigue. A lot of the structure of 17th century France in this book is focused on Catholicism as like the main leader in the story is the Archbishop of the church. And so there's a lot of biblical influence there and talk about faith and stuff. So I really enjoyed seeing that in this context. past. The only real negative I have to say about Serpentine Dub is just sometimes things like irked me. I feel like I can't talk about a lot of them because they are very dependent on spoilers, but like for example, I feel like very early on in the story, Reed and Lou are like super comfortable referring to each other as my husband or my wife, like in their internal monologue, and it just felt weird to me that they would be so comfortable to use an endearing term like that when they're supposed to hate each other. I loved the relationship. I was swooning the whole time, and I thought the pacing of like how they fall for each other was great, but just the fact that they called each other husband and wife so early like really bothered me for some bizarre reason. And another example is that while I thought many of the plot twists were like super shocking and really clever, I thought some of the reveals like weren't as impactful as they could have been. So yeah, my critiques of Serpentine Dub are very minimal and very specific at that, but overall I just loved this book. I thought it was so fun. I did not expect myself to get as invested as I now am, and I really would recommend you guys put this book on your TBR if you are a fantasy lover for when it comes out in September, because it is not one you're going to want to miss. So listen, I know we have this moment in my videos a lot where I have to insert a clip that I filmed a day later, and I'm just like incapable of filming a video in one day. But this time it's not because I forgot, it's because I had to go to school like I mentioned earlier. So I'm here to just quickly talk about the final book of my haul. This is actually a book that I started and read for the majority of March, but I only finished it for the first time in April, and I decided to keep it until the end of this video because I figured no one but me really cares about this book, and that is How to Control Your Anxiety Before It Controls You by Albert Ellis. So this book talks about conquering anxiety through methods of a specific type of psychotherapy, which is rational emotive behavior therapy. The core idea behind rational emotive behavior therapy is that our beliefs about ourselves, others, and the life circumstances we encounter are more influential than the people or events themselves. An easy example might be recognizing that you are not upset that you got a bad grade on a test. You are upset because you think that getting a bad grade means that you are a bad student or that you are disappointing other people. For the semester in my Foundations of Counseling class, we had to pick a theory of counseling, read a book about it, and then write a paper based on it. So I decided to go with rational emotive behavior therapy because it is a form of counseling that I'm very interested in. But I decided to give How to Control Your Anxiety Before It Controls You 3 out of 5 stars because while I found a lot of the information about REBT very valuable, I just struggled with this book for a few reasons. Number one, this book was just very dry. I don't feel it had a very conversational narrative, and it was just like a lot of information being thrown at you. For that reason, even though it's considered a self-help book, like I would not consider this a self-help book. I think it is way more theory-based, and this is something to read if you are interested specifically in rational emotive behavior therapy. If you're looking for a self-help book to help you deal with your anxiety on your own, I just don't think this is the most palatable for the wide public. Number two, there was just no discussion on the limitations of rational emotive behavior therapy. Like, I understand Albert Ellis is like clearly trying to sell a product with this book, but as a student, it doesn't help me if I don't know where this therapy has its weaknesses. I feel like this book sort of operated out of a best case scenario perspective 100% of the time. It was like, if you repeat this and do it regularly, like you will conquer your anxiety. And I'm like, that's great in theory, but like what happens if you or a client is very resistant? Like, how do you work through that? It wasn't really explained. While I don't think now that REBT is going to be like my main theoretical orientation going into the counseling field, I absolutely am going to incorporate a lot of techniques and methods behind it. So while this book was immensely valuable to me, I also do just have a lot of criticisms about the structure of the book and the theory in general after reading. So that concludes my April reading wrap up. I really hope you guys enjoyed hearing my thoughts on the books that I read this month. In the comments below, I would love to know what you guys read in the month of April and what you thought of them, or if you have read any of the books that I mentioned and what your opinions were, because I'm super interested to know. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you soon for a new one. Bye!